This is a 1966 Wolseley Hornet, and it is in effect a Posh Mini. And it's proof that BMC were completely shameless in their never-ending attempt to badge engineer all of the things. In the early 1960s, the British Motor Corporation was a small empire that loved being a little bit backwards when it came to distribution. It had 5 distinct marques: Austin and Morris for the mainstream, MG for those with a sporting flavour, and then Riley and Wolseley for those that were a bit posh. The problem was that BMC didn't have much money, so different cars for each marque were completely out of the question. It would all be done through badge engineering. Brand loyalty existed a little bit more back then than it does now, and with individual dealers for each marque getting a little bit restless, the powers that be at BMC had to look hard at their model range. The Isagonis designed wonder that was the Mini was launched in 1959 as both the Austin 7 and the Morris Mini Minor. But BMC saw an opportunity to expand their audience to the kind of people who wouldn't dare drive something as common as an Austin or a Morris. It was a shameless ploy to get stupid people to believe they were buying something posh, when in reality they were buying a Mini. Brilliant as they were, Minis were not posh. But in 1961, 2 new cars were announced, the Riley Elf and this one, the Wolseley Hornet. Following the Isagonis philosophy that would later plague the Land Crab, the Mini was an austere little car, and that just wouldn't wash on a Wolseley. So, although the centre section was the same, the front and the rear of the car were changed quite dramatically. Both cars have this big chrome grille here in the middle, which of course automatically makes them dead posh. But this being a Wolseley, it has the famous Wolseley light up badge here. So when you turn your lights on, there's a little bulb behind this badge that glows. To fill in the areas at the sides, there are these little horizontal grilles with different indicators on the end. The Wolseleys and Rileys also had different bumpers that were a little bit thicker than standard Mini ones and had these big overriders on the end. At the back is the biggest change, as it's now a proper 3-box saloon with ickle tiny fins and very period rear lamps. This is the best part of the Elf and the Hornet, as it brings practicality and adds a bit of 60s style and sophistication to the design. Style and sophistication aren't things I'd say about the front though, because I really think it does just look stuck on. These are weird cars to look at from the rear quarter, however, because as much as the rear end is quite well done, I love the fins especially, you can't help but see the Mini here, and it kind of almost sinks into the rear end and it just looks a little bit odd. Notice though, there are no seam strips on the C-pillars. Very early Elves and Hornets didn't have the front ones either, but from about 1962, 1963 or something, they got them back, probably to save money. Whereas these rear ones would end here anyway, so it made sense just to carry on making this panel without the seam strip in it. That being said, look at how cute it is! Who knew that giving a Mini a slightly awkward face and ickle tiny fins on the back would somehow make it even cuter? It may have been a completely cynical and frankly dreadful attempt to expand the Mini concept, but 60 years on it's just so charming. It is a slice of old England with the firecracker nature of the Mini. What's not to love? Realistically, the biggest difference with the Elf and the Hornet is of course the boot, which is quite an appreciable amount bigger than a standard Mini. Not that a standard Mini boot was particularly small for a car of its size, because it is quite big, but you can see the standard Mini's boot would have ended about here, but you get all this extra space, and you can see the fuel tank, I think, standard Mini as well, so you get all this extra space here. Of course, the actual opening itself is quite low, so you've got to bend down to get into it. Under the floor here, there is a proper spare wheel, and of course the battery, standard there on a Mini. But it's nice that you do get a boot board. I think that's standard for these. I'm pretty sure it is anyway. And just one interesting bit of information that none of you are interested in, but I am anyway, is this hole here. You see, earlier Minis, when they were being built, were actually put on a spit. So the entire body shell was supported on the assembly lines by a spit running through there, running through the centre of the car, and then running through behind the speedo. There's another hole there. And so you could basically support the whole car. It's So there's a piece of information you never needed to know. You now join me inside the Wolseley Hornet, where it feels very much like a Mini. You of course have the huge standard BMC twin spoke steering wheel of the era that makes you feel like a bit of a bus driver, but also makes the steering wonderfully light as well. Of course, little 10-inch wheels do help with that. You of course have the famous Mini centre instruments, but they're trimmed in wood, of course, because it's a Wolseley, don't you know. The Riley Elf was a little bit more expensive than the Wolseley Hornet, and one of the things it did get over the Wolseley was a full wooden dashboard with a couple of little doors here to get to two separate glove boxes on the side. Mini aficionados will instantly notice two things that aren't normal for a standard 1966 Mini. One of those is the air vents here. Standard Minis only got these air vents in 1969, but the Riley and the Wolseley got them at some point in the mid-60s, and these are just nice fresh air vents, just good to have. And again, they're just a sign of a little bit more luxury in these cars, although luxury is a relative term. This is not luxury by today's standards. You'll also notice the doors, because this has wind-up windows, and standard Minis didn't get wind-up windows until 1969. And this also has the internal hinges, so it basically has Mark III Mini doors, but in 1966. Again, another little touch of luxury as opposed to the sliding windows you'd get on a normal Mini. This one is trimmed brilliantly in this fantastic red carpets, the red vinyl, I suppose it's vinyl on the dashboard, and red leather on the seats, which is patinated fantastically. It is just a lovely place to be. It's a proper throwback in here. And it feels really big, just as with any Mini, because the dashboard is so far away from you. You know, this is only 10 feet's worth of car, but the upright windscreen and the dashboard so far away from you makes it feel like a really, really big car. You've got more than enough room for your elbows, of course more than enough room for this huge steering wheel, and just about enough room for your feet as well. But the visibility, of course, is absolutely fantastic, owing to the little tiny pillars. Not something you'd see today, but this car is all the better for it. So, in the centre, as I said, you get the traditional Mini gauges. So in the centre, you just have a speedometer and a fuel gauge. On the left, a water temperature gauge, and on the right, a little oil pressure gauge. Switch gear, of course, is very, very limited. The centre switch panel has your slot for your ignition key, a push-pull for your heater, heat/cold, and a pull for your choke. These two switches here are your single-speed wipers and your side lights and headlamps. You'll notice these little rubber extension pieces on the end of the toggle switches. I've never actually sat in a 60s Mini that doesn't have these on, because most cars of the era, of course, have fixed seat belts rather than inertia reels. So once you've got your seatbelt on, you are sat in the seat and you can't really pull forward like that. So unless you're particularly tall, you can't reach, and so the rubber extensions are there to help you reach all the controls. There is one more switch here, which is of course unmarked, and that is a little manual push for your washer pump. Down below the switch panel is the pathetic excuse for a heater. Very, very simple. You just have a direction control. So I'll take those keys out actually. So you have it in the car from the size of the heater to your windscreen through these little tiny, probably useless screen vents, and then off at the bottom. There is a switch for a heater fan down there, but again, it's unmarked and you can't really see it. We're in a very, very different era here, folks. Between those two screen vents, there is a little tiny ashtray, which is not useless because it's too small. I think it's probably useless because it's just too far away from you. But then again, Izagonis was a chain smoker, and so you have two individual ashtrays for the two rear seat passengers. Bonkers. He designed the car so that you couldn't put a radio in, but designed in 3 ashtrays. Peak Izagonis. The pedals, of course, are little tiny, down here on the floor. This gear lever as well is the rod change mechanism from a Mini Cooper. Standard Minis of the era would have had the big magic wand gear lever coming out here somewhere, that was directly connected to the back of the gearbox. That was a bit ponderous, shall we say. but this has the rod change, which means that the gear lever goes into the floor down here in a much more normal position for more modern motoring, shall we say. Of course, there is then a handbrake in the middle, a little tiny lever for that. Your seatbelt buckles, which say BMC on them, lovely. And there's not much else, but of course, I feel very free and open to swing my arms around because there are no headrests on the top of these seats. And speaking of the seats, they just fold forwards like that. So if you're in a crash in a Mark 1 Mini, or a Mark 2 Mini, or a Mark 3 Mini for that matter, or indeed this Mark 3 Wolseley Hornet, the seat will just fly forwards, killing the occupants in the back, who will smash themselves against the seat and probably these metal rails, and will kill the person sitting in the front because they'll smash themselves against the windscreen. How lovely. In the back it is, well, a Mini, so there's a bit more space than you might expect back here. As much as my knees do brush against the seat, it's very soft, and I can just push it forwards as well. As I said just a minute ago, these seats, very comfy, very bouncy as well. Feeling extra bouncy actually in this one on the mad hydroelastic suspension. Not quite so much headroom, but people were shorter back then. Loads of glass space, so it feels nice and airy back here. Of course, no headrests, and a very, very tiny parcel shelf as well. But again, it just feels a lot bigger than it ought to for this kind of car. Again, you get the ashtray in the back, as I mentioned, and a huge door pocket, like absolutely enormous. But that is just a hallmark of early Minis. You do get pop-out rear windows for a little bit of ventilation, which are just lovely. I love pop-out rear windows. I'm really annoyed that my Metro doesn't have them, and I would like to get some at some point. Making that iconic A-Series thrum is, well, an A-Series. Originally an 848cc, the same as a standard Mini, this one and all later Elves and Hornets got a 998cc engine, the same capacity as a Mini Cooper, but detuned. It makes just under 40 brake horsepower. Now, the addition of the Wolseley and Riley big front grille means that as much as the Mini was already a bit hazardous at the front end for this bonnet latch here, you're now really stuck when it comes to trying to work on these things. But it does mean you get better access to the distributor, which is obviously down here on an A-Series. Very easy in reach because there's no fixed grille in there, but you should really think about taking the bonnet off if you're actually going to work on one of these. Apart from just the engine, Elves and Hornets also got better front brakes than standard Minis, though they were still drums all round, no discs on here. This isn't a Cooper. This car being in 1966 means that it, along with all other Minis, gets Alex Moulton's hydroelastic suspension, which basically means there are no coil springs or rubber cones in the Mini's case, and instead the suspension is done by fluid. There were a few special Hornets made. In 1966, Heinz, maker of soups and sauces and the like, commissioned 57 Crayford convertible Hornets to be given as prizes in a competition. Until production ended in 1969, 30,000 Riley Elves and 28,000 Wolseley Hornets were built, making this little car pretty rare in the modern world. These little cars were effectively replaced by the Mini Clubman as the British Leyland merger rationalised the entire range, and the Mini kind of became a mark in its own right, free of Austin and Morris, Wolseley and Riley. So there was a look at a slightly posher classic Mini. Same cheeky little car, just with a bit more practicality at the back and some old English style at the front. So for now, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and maybe even subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'll have more videos coming along soon.